Hello everyone, this is Connor, BoatsDon'tSink, here with another deck profile for you guys. Today we're talking about the newly released Is It Wrong to Try to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon, Danmachi. And we're going to be talking about the Comeback Gate event-focused deck. This is what I assume the deck that everyone's posting deck profiles on. It's sort of the accepted go-to build for the set. But if I'm going to talk about decks from this set, I feel like it would be rather wrong to not talk about this one. So let's start off by taking a look at the deck list as usual. It's pretty straightforward, a lot of 4-ofs. You can see we're playing 12 event cards, which is a lot more than any normal deck would consider playing. If you're familiar with the game, you know, most decks are going to be playing between, 0 and 4 events. They might be playing one event card at 4 copies. A lot of times, even, it's, a 2 of, a 3 of, not an entire 12 events. But it's what the entire deck is sort of built around, what its strategy revolves around, and something that sets this deck apart as a sort of unique deck that actually has a really strong place in the meta. So let's start by looking at our Climax combos as usual. They're not as sort of the build around part of the deck as most decks, since we have this whole event focus going on, but they're still rather important, especially the level 1 combo. We're playing First Adventure Belle, which combos with the comeback trigger Unyielding Feelings, and this is the important Climax combo in our deck. It's the one that revolves around all of our events and is going to allow us to get some of the important ones into our hand. The level 3 Proof of Trust Hestia, we're actually mostly playing because A, it's a healer, which there aren't a lot of good healers in Danmachi, so having access to this heal to stock is pretty good on its own. And second, it's on a gate trigger, which is going to allow us to resolve our level 1 combo more times. This deck wants to just loop the level 1 Belle combo over and over again, and having a gate trigger is going to let us get those climaxes back into hand to play them multiple times. And on top of that, the Hestia finisher effect isn't actually bad. We'll take a look at it in a second. But starting off with the Belle, his first effect is on attack, this card gets plus X power until end of turn. X is equal to the number of Firebolt in your waiting room times 1500. So Firebolt's one of our events. It salvages a level X or lower, where X is the number of this specific Belle in your waiting room. So it's always going to be able to grab our level 1 combo as long as one of them is in waiting room. And it's going to make this card huge. One of the biggest draws to this deck is that it has very good matchups into like defensive field-based decks, specifically standby decks. Mushoku Tensei being a huge deck in the meta right now, Danmachi has a very favorable matchup into its board, its numbers, where they can get lots of reverses, and force Mushoku Tensei to have to rebuild its board almost every turn. This Belle, if you have 2 Firebolts in a waiting room, is already swinging for 85 with the Climax, which is big enough to reverse 1/1s. 3 Firebolts, it's at 10k, and it goes up to, what is that, 11.5 with Climax if you have all 4 Firebolts in waiting room, just as a 1/0 attacker, and that's not even tied to the Climax combo. The Climax combo itself is when the Climax Unyielding Feelings is placed on your Climax area. If this card is in your center stage and you have another character, there's a lot of traits in this set, but every card checks for all 3 of these traits, and every card has at least one of these 3 traits. So if you have another character, choose one of the following effects and perform it. You can either choose a Hestia knife in your waiting room and return it to hand, or search your deck for a Hestia knife, which is another one of the events we're playing. It's a blue 1/0 event that it's checked up for add a character, sort of typical profile, with a lot of extra conditions stapled on it because A, it's a counter, so it's going to have the requirement you have to have a specific name or trait on board. In this case, you need a character with Hestia or Belle in its name. But it also can be played without fulfilling color requirement, which is really good. Obviously, our level 1 combo is red, so we might not always have access to blue when we want to play this card. And the downside for needing, or for having this benefit of being able to play it without color, is that you can't play it at counter step unless you have a Belle, a character with Belle in its name specifically. which both of those should be pretty easy, so really good card. And this might actually remind some of you that have been playing for a little while, since around early 2020, of Goblin Slayer. Goblin Slayer had a very similar combo that also grabbed a counter that checked top 4 to add a character. Goblin Slayer wanted to win board on defense and often played standby triggers to help accomplish that, especially since the Goblin Slayer level 1 was 6,000 power cross-turn. Bell is similar, but this deck is a lot more offensive, so you're going to have the same deck control and like wanting to loop your combo and all that Goblin Slayer did, but in an offensive way where you're trying to wipe your opponent's board on offense and force them to replace it rather than keep your own board alive on defense. Looking at our level 3 combo, first effect is plus 1,000 for each other character in your backstage. So it's a 10-5 with 2 backstage characters. And on play, discard 1, heal to stock. Pretty good. It means we can field 3 of these for only 4 stock. And the Climax combo is on attack. If the Climax is in your Climax area, choose one of your characters. That character gets plus 1 soul and the following ability until end of turn. Once per turn, when damage dealt by this card is cancelled, you may deal 2 damage to your opponent. So it's adds a little bit of reach to us because we're getting plus 1 soul. So our attacks are for whatever you put it on, price swinging for 4. You can actually stack these on the same character. So you can, if you put all 3 on one Hestia, it swings for 6 with 3 cancel burn 2s. And then the cancel burn 2 is a little bit of damage confirmation. I don't think this is a finisher that's going to like consistently help you kill someone from like 3-0. 3-1 maybe just because of the 2s. But I think this is something that you're more looking to close out a game from like 3-3 or so. But again, we're playing it because it heals. We're playing it because it's a gate trigger. It's not unrealistic to get multiple turns with this finisher, just because we do have a lot of ways to salvage in this deck, and it heals. So if you don't kill, you might just survive because you heal back down to 3-0. And this deck compresses pretty well, and you're not spending a whole lot of resources on getting the Hestia out. Now, let's take a look at the sort of central part of the deck, the events themselves. First up, we have Firebolt, which we've already discussed. Salvage a level X or lower character. X is the number of first adventure bell in your waiting room. This is nice because it can always grab any of our zeros, so cards like Climax Swappers. If we ever are in a spot where we need them, Firebolt can always grab them, because we'll always have at least 0 bells in our waiting room. And as long as there is a bell in the waiting room, we can grab it, because then we'll have 1, and we'll be able to grab a level 1 or lower. This card's main use, I would say, is being able to loop our level 1 combo. Since the bells are never going to live on defense, if we want to resolve it multiple turns in a row, we need to use the bells, and then they get reversed and go to waiting room, and then we use Firebolt to get them back to hand, because unfortunately our Brainstorm is search, not salvage. These cards, this card, even later in the game, right, when you don't need the Bell 1-0s, is pretty good, because if you have just 2 or 3 of them sitting in your waiting room, like, you can just grab a finisher, right? So, really good card, just nice 0 cost consistency. Second event, another one that we already talked about, the Hestia Knife. Strike top 4, add 1. This card, one thing I see people do wrong with this card a lot, that I just want to cover real quick. The counter timing look at top 4s, you very rarely want to actually play at counter timing. Because unless your deck has no climaxes left in it, you're not really accomplishing anything other than grabbing a card earlier than you have to. Which means you're going to have less information on what you need to grab. Waiting until after your next draw and clock steps, you'll have more information on what cards you need, what you need to grab off your top 4. Removing random cards from the top of your deck will not improve your chances of canceling, and really only has the potential to remove climaxes from your total deck count, which is going to mean you can cancel less. The times that you'd want to use this on counter step are if you have no climaxes and you can mill into a refresh, or if you are close to leveling up and can mill down low enough to guarantee clock compression. Say you have 3 cards in deck and you're at 1-6. Even if you have a climax left, if your opponent swings for 1, it's probably worth using the Hestia Knife and just going through those 3 cards so that you're going to keep those 6 cards in clock on refresh and get compression there. Because the 1 damage isn't a big downside, really. But apart from timings like that, you'll pretty much want to save these for your own turn. However, I will say there is an exception in this deck specifically where our Brainstorm lets you draw ditch whenever you play an event. So Hestia Knife is the only way that we can do that on our opponent's turn. So if you want to get multiple draw ditches and sort of make use of those, especially if you have 2 Brainstorms in play, you'll want to play like one of these on defense every turn just to get those draw ditches. But again, this is how our deck speed. One of the biggest things that this deck, apart from beating up standby decks, this deck is known for having really good control over its deck state and being able to compress and keep sort of looping through the deck to keep cancels going. It's similar to a deck like Memory Snow in that regard, just with obviously a lot higher power lines and sort of better advantage engines. So Hestia Knife's a big part of that. The last event we're playing is Pyonkichi. This is a 1/1 event, salvage a character, and give a character 4,000 power. So this is another source of our massive power that's going to help us run over standby boards. This can make your bells anywhere between 12 and 15,000 power very easily, which is going to run over 2/2s, a lot of early plays even. You can use this to buff our own early plays into the 13 to 15,000 power range. You can even use this to buff like level 0s high enough to reverse your opponent's level 1 boards, which is great. Especially, like, you hit level 1, you push, like, a Brainstorm up, play a Pyonkichi to grab your level 1 combo, and then just pump your Brainstorm to, like, 6k or something. So, really good card. And it's made even better by a card we'll take a look at in just a second. Because we might not have to be paying 1 stock for this. So, we'll take a look at all of the cards we have to support our events. Obviously, we're not just jamming 12 events into a deck without, like, dedicated support for them. And first is Turf War Velf. So this is a 1/0/25 continuous. Pyonkichi gets -1 cost while in your hand, meaning our salvage 1 plus 4,000 power is just costless, which actually makes it better than Firebolt, really. As long as we can play this for free, it is a Firebolt where X is always 3 and we get to pump 4,000 power. It's just not buffing our level 1 combo at that point by being in waiting room. But the Velf's other effect, pay 1, rest this card, look it up to X from the top of your deck, choose a level 1 or higher card from among them, reveal it, put it in hand, put the rest in waiting room. X is the number of Pyonkichi in waiting room plus 1. So once we've played some Pyonkichis and gotten salvages, or if we've just, some have hit waiting room naturally, you can pay 1, rest, look at, top 3, top 4, maybe even top 5, and add a level 1 or higher. Which means this is basically a Brainstorm that probably always hits. We play enough level 1 or higher cards. But being a level 1 or higher card means we can also add events, and all 3 of our events are level 1. So this is one of the ways we have to grab events just during our main phase to sort of keep the cycle going between hand fixing. This is a card that we'll pretty much always want in our back row, though, just for the Pyonkichi -1 cost effect. Next we have Part-Time Job on the side, Hestia. This is a 0/0/15. On play, look at up to 3 cards from the top of your deck. Choose up to 1 event you find, reveal it, put it in hand, put the rest in waiting room. If you put 1 card into your hand, choose a card in your hand, put it into your waiting room. So this is similar to like the Rize effects, where you reveal top 3, add 1, ditch 1. But this only has to discard if you add a card, not if you reveal a card. And it grabs events, which is kind of crazy. This first card they printed like this. Some people compare this to Kome from Idolmaster Cinderella Girls, which did a similar thing for climaxes. But obviously, we played 12 events in this deck. A lot of them let us select into other cards. So, if you play this Hestia and hit, a Firebolt or a Pyonkichi off your top 3, then you just instantly get access to your entire waiting room, pretty much. So we definitely want these. It's a card that we, especially early game, want to be playing to try to get the Firebolts and into our waiting room for high power on our bells. And when we take a look at we have another level 0 in this deck that's going to allow us to bounce this back to our hand to reuse it multiple times early in the game. Or just to bounce it into our hand to hold to use its second effect at a more opportune moment. Excuse me. Second effect is on play from hand, choose one of your opponent's characters. That character gets the following ability until end of opponent's next turn. Continuous, this card cannot move to another position of your stage. So this is just another way that we're really beating up on standby decks. If they stand by like a 2/2 to the backstage, we can just play this and lock it in the backstage, and they're not going to be able to push it forward. which means they're going to have to expend more cards to actually field attackers, which might not even be actual optimal attackers. And if you play one of these Hestias multiple turns in a row, you can just sort of like lock an important card. Especially if your opponent like standbys out a finisher, like right when they hit level 2. You can just lock it in their back row for a while and like, well, guess they just don't have access to that finisher, right? So really good card, great hand fix, great controllable mill, especially because there's no cost if we don't grab an event. So we can just play this to mill 3 if we want deck speed. Our next card is our Brainstorm. As I said earlier, this has once per turn when you play an event you can draw a card. If you do, discard a card. So more hand fix, more filter, more deck speed. This is one of the reasons that we would want to play Hestia Knife on defense every now and then, just to, especially if you're trying to look for a climax. And it also has Act, Brainstorm, pay 1, rest this, Brainstorm 4 for each climax search. I do wish this was a salvage Brainstorm. I'm really big, like, decks where you're level 1, where you want to loop your level 1 combo, but it's small on defense, so it's gonna die. I think you really want salvage Brainstorm so that you can salvage your level 1 combo back after it goes to waiting room. This being a search makes that a little awkward. You don't always have great targets to go find. So, not a fan of that, but the Draw Ditch makes this card worth playing, as well as some other cards. But I think maybe there's an argument. There is a salvage Brainstorm in this set. Maybe there's an argument for testing it out if you're not as big of a fan of the Draw Ditch. Or if you were planning on only playing, say, like 2 Brainstorms in the first place, you might not be getting as much value out of the Draw Ditch anyway. And the last card that sort of event support for us is Skill Activation Hestia. So this is auto, when you play an event, you may put this card into your stock. This is a profile that Goblin Slayer also had on a 500 assist. Our other effect is rest this card to give a character 1000 power until end of turn, which means we can actually, you know, this deck will hit max hand size very frequently, and even have to discard down to hand size. So one of the ways we can sort of avoid that, you know, you can play this Hestia, and then just rest it, pump 1000, and then play an event and send it off to stock. So it's -1 to hand, but if you had enough hand anyway, you don't really care. It's just a free 1000 power and +1 stock. So that's what this will be used for a lot of the time, I think. Or just early game to play it, rest, pump 1000. Or you can attack with this if your opponent has like on reverse. You know they have an on reverse effect at level 1. You can play this to front row and attack with it, and then Hestia Knife on defense, right? To send this to stock to sort of like dodge reverses, which is also pretty cool. Just like something to keep in mind, not something you'll do often, probably. And then the last sort of cool thing with this is we have an early play with a 4 or more characters on board condition. So you can play this as one of your 4 characters. Early play, heal, play an event, send this to stock, and then early play again to the new open spot. We don't play enough copies of the early play in this build to do that, but it's something to keep in mind. Now, looking at the rest of the cards in the deck that don't really fit into a specific shell or package, we have Victory Feast Tiona. This is just a Climax swap. It also has on play, you can swap a card in your level and a card in your waiting room. Some of the cards in this set do need experience, either a specific card or level or whatever. But this deck doesn't need that, so that effect's pretty irrelevant here. It's just to appear to be a climax swap, because like I said, we want to loop our combos, so this is going to make sure that we can always get the right climax. Next, we have qualifications of a hero Bell. This is our main plussing level 0. Beginning of your opponent's attack phase, you can pay 1, put the top card of your deck into your clock, and return this card to your hand. If you do, choose one of your other characters and return it to your hand. So this is pay 1, clock 1 to get 2 of your characters off board back to hand, pretty much. The Bell himself and 1 other. Meaning we're paying like the typical Ricky cost, pay 1, clock 1, but we're getting 2 cards out of it instead of 1, which means that this is, you know, huge card advantage. And typically an effect like this isn't considered like very high quality card advantage, but if we have cards like the Hestia that like checks top 3 for an event or something like that that we can bounce to hand and then reuse, we can actually get a lot of value out of this, and it's going to help us set up very well. Helps us attack a lot early, get stock while we are more likely to trigger clean, etc. Second effect is to pay 1, sack this. If you're level 2 or higher, you can choose an Argonaut Bell in your waiting room, put it on the stage position this is on. We're not actually playing Argonaut Bell in this deck. That's mainly meant for another deck that we might talk about at some other point. So this is pretty much just here for its first effect, just to be a big plussing 0 to get us a lot of cards in hand. And it actually has great synergy with this next card, which is another plussing 0 that we're playing. So first class Adventurer Ice is plus 1500 power if you have one or less other characters. And at the beginning of your opponent's attack phase, you can move this to an open position of your center stage with a character facing this card. So it's just a 3500 chaser. We've seen stuff like this in Slime with the Millum, 7 Deadly Sins with the Gill Thunder, etc. But this one's nice because we can actually... I mean, the condition to gain power is a little more strict than those other sets, so this sometimes is going to be a 2000. But at the same time, we can play this with the bell we just looked at and attack 3 times. And then at attack phase, pay 1, clock 1, bounce the bell and the other character. And now Ice's power condition is turned on, so she's 3500 and can move to the entire center stage because we just emptied out all of our board slots. So that's some pretty cool synergy that can get you like a lot of attacks and then still hold up this Ice as a way to sort of stop your opponent's attackers. So we're just playing this as more plussing zeros to be able to field, to make sure that we're going to draw one early, right? You never just want to draw an opening hand where none of your cards really like replace themselves or do anything, and then you run out of hand size early. We're playing one copy of Present of Croquette's Hestia. This is a 2/1/6/5 on play. Choose one of your opponent's characters, put it in their memory, and then they put that character from their memory back onto stage. Not a super relevant effect right now. Mainly just gets rid of like minus soul effects, or if your opponent's playing like Rider from Fate, it's going to get rid of the like you can't frontal attack this. Stuff like that, like lingering effects, lingering power. I guess if your opponent's playing like Ruxia Hololive and they summon something out, you can get rid of the cross turn 2500 by blinking it. But not something we're super relying on here. Second effect is on play, pay 1, discard 1. Your opponent chooses a Climax in their waiting room, returns the rest of their waiting room to their deck, and then shuffles. So this is just a decompression tool. Since our finisher isn't super potent on its own, having some extra decompression tools can help us get the kill at level 3. Especially since our combo pumps a soul. This might just help us stick those swings for like 4 and 5 anyway, which is great. Just something to help us consistently get the kill. Especially like sometimes your opponent will just have a turn right where they refresh and then go through a bunch of cards and just don't see any climaxes, or they might trigger some climaxes. So they have a waiting room that's like 10 or 15 cards with only 1 or 2 climaxes in it. That's really when you want to play this, just to help get the kill. Also playing one copy of Little Ricky Bell. So this is our early play. 3275 is pretty small. -1 level if you have 4 or more characters. Gets plus 1500 for each marker under it. Heals on play. And then on attack, if there are no markers under it, you can choose up to 1 Hestia Knife and up to 1 Ushiwakamaru in your waiting room. Put them face up underneath this as markers. So we are playing the Hestia Knife, which means we can get this guy to 9k, which is still pretty small, especially on defense. But in combination with Pyonkichi, that's still a 13,000 offense, 14,000 with a Climax. So we are going to be able to kill something with this guy on offense. He's just probably going to get reversed on the crackback. But we're mainly just playing this guy because it's a consistent early play condition that we can heal with if we want some heals at level 2. Or at least a singular heal. We can play him once, and then if he gets reversed, we can salvage him back the next turn and play him again. And the last card we're playing is Adventurer Bell. This is a 3/2 10,000. On play, look at up to X cards from the top of your deck. Choose a card from among them, put it into your hand, put the rest in the waiting room. X is the number of characters you have. And on attack, pay 1, discard a character. If Hestia Knife is in your waiting room, you may pay the cost. If you do, deal 1 damage to your opponent. So this is a bit cheaper than the normal pay 2 ditch one, but it does require Hestia Knife in a waiting room. Shouldn't be hard given the deck we're playing. Some decks don't play this card, they just play a second early play healer instead. I like to check top X just to make sure that we can get our finisher Climax. Since a lot of times we're going to be looping our level 1 Climax combo, we might be getting rid of any gates that we're just holding, so if we don't draw one near the end of the game, or trigger a gate to add one to hand right before we go to level 3, this is going to let us dig to try to find a Climax to do our finisher. And it's an additional just sort of like pseudo finisher effect on its own, just to deal 1 damage. Could be a lot worse. Now for some other options. People a lot of times talk about like this is a solved deck, like the list is just set in stone, or like has like 3 flex slots. But looking through the card list, there's actually a lot of cards that I think have the potential to fit into this list. And even if there are only you know, maybe 4 or 5 flex slots in the deck. There are a lot of cards that can fill those flex slots. So I'm going to try to get through these pretty quick, just so I don't have y'all sitting here forever. First, we have A Man's Dreams Hermes. This is a 001k. On play, choose one of your opponent's characters and one of its traits. The character loses that trait. The reason you would want to play this is for decks like Mushoku Tensei, Quintessential Quintuplets. Basically, if they have effects that say, if all of your characters are trait, or if you have 4 or more other trait characters, you can blank a trait to turn off their effects. This won't affect stuff that's like just checking one card or whatever, since you're only getting rid of one trait. This isn't as good as Fate's Rider 2-1. But it can still beat a couple things, so it might be a worthy tech. And then pay 1, send this to memory, look at top 3. It's just some more deck control. So good card if you want to turn off. It's mainly for turning off Encore against Quintuplets. They need a full board of their trait to gain character Encore. So if you're going to reverse their 2/2s, and you don't want them to just Encore them, you can play this card to turn them off. Case's Conclusion Aina. This is actually a card that a lot of Western decks I've seen are playing instead of the Chaser slot. So they're just foregoing those extra plussing zeros. To play this, it's on play, drop search, so just extra consistency to get our level 1 combo. And it's a level 0 bottom deck bomb. Which, one of the reasons this is good right now is decks like Hololive are playing a lot of cards that plus when they go from stage to waiting room. So you've got like the Aqua level 0, the Aki Rose level 0. Decks are playing like Chiris, so the on death you can ditch 1, check top 4. So even Hololive has Fubuki with that. Mushoku Tensei has an Eris with that effect. So there's a lot of stuff that you can actually turn off with this Aina. By just like bombing it, sending it to bottom of deck, your opponent's not going to get their effect. That can actually set your opponent back a pretty good bit early. And even if you go first, you can play this. And if they don't want to crash into it and get bombed, the next turn you can like bounce it back to hand with your bell, so you can drop search with it again afterwards or whatever. Next we have Role of Sending Off Takamikazuchi. This card has some pretty cool applications in other decks besides the event deck, specifically the 12 choice deck where you can shuffle some of your choice triggers back. But the more I thought about it in this deck, it might be justifiable as like a one-of. It's on play, you can return 2 characters from your waiting room to your deck, shuffle your deck. This card's soul does not decrease by side attacking until end of turn. And then on attack, choose one of your other characters. It gets 500 times the number of your other characters. So just extra power pump to clear board. But the shuffle back effect doesn't really do anything specifically good in this build. But because of all the deck speed we have, it does allow us to mill down to say like 1 card in deck or 2 cards in deck. And then shuffle back guaranteed clean triggers. And we get to choose whether they're, you know, no trigger or soul triggers for extra damage, depending on whether we're like playing a climax or something. So like maybe there's a use there where you can use this to mill down a guaranteed clean stock. I'm still not a huge fan of this card in the deck, but it's definitely worth mentioning. I've seen it in some Japanese lists. Next we have Choice for Survival Lily. This is along the same lines as the drop search. This is a drop salvage instead. Pay 1, ditch 1. Choose a character in your waiting room, return it to hand, and then choose one of your other characters and give it 1,000 power. Again, this is more power pump just to keep clearing board. We want to stick with that theme of getting a lot of power on board so that we can really deal with like standby decks and board-based decks. This also gets a +1 soul in the middle position of your center stage. And being something that we can always grab off of Firebolt, I like having these level 0s that just swing for 2 soul. One of my favorite cards in Quintuplets was the 2 soul Drop Searcher. Also in Bang Dream, like these decks that just have easy access to that card and can just like loop it and play it over and over again. I think these profiles are really powerful. It's also yellow fix if you want to play some yellow cards we'll look at later. Next is Sleeping Goddess Hestia. It's worth noting this card has not been released yet and has not been announced for any release as of the time I'm recording this. It might be the August shop promo, but we don't know yet. This card is on the card list on the website, so I do want to talk about it in case it does release. We just don't know how we're getting it yet. So, on play, pay 1, ditch 1, check top 3, add a card, which is awesome. That can add events and climaxes, which is adding just extra consistency all across the board for us. And on play, pay 1, put an event from your hand into your waiting room to choose an event in your waiting room and return it to your hand. Paying 1 to do that doesn't seem great when all of our events sort of do the same thing. But, you know, if you have a Hestia knife in hand from your combo, but the card you want is in your waiting room, you can play this, turn the Hestia knife into a Pyonkichi, pump 4k, and grab the card you actually wanted, which is like a cool line of play. But also, there are some other events you might consider in the deck, so if you wanted to play like a one-of those events, this can help you tutor into those more consistently, by just like turning Hestia knives and stuff into your one-ofs. We have support role, Chigusa. So first effect on this basically doesn't matter. It gives a 2-1 vanilla, 3k, and twin drive. The second effect is why we would be playing this card. Rest this card, choose one of your characters. That character gets 1000 power and the following ability. When this reverses battle opponent, you can put that character at the bottom of your opponent's deck. So 1000 power, again, is more power pump, more ways to get over standby boards. But specifically, standby boards often have Encore on their characters, and this lets us bottom deck them so that they can't Encore their character. So if you're going to be playing against a lot of that, similar to like the Hermes, where we're using this to beat Encore cards, instead of turning off their condition, we're just bottom decking them. So I think this is a card worth considering if that becomes an issue. We have Drunken Goddess Hestia. This is an anti-change counter. Discard 2 traded characters to bottom deck one of our opponent's characters as a higher level than they are. Only issues with this card is that, like, you might not have the 2 traded characters to discard if your hand is just, like, all events. But I think this card's really powerful, especially because, like, we're always winning board on offense, hopefully. So, you know, especially if our opponent doesn't think we're playing this, because most lists don't. So if our opponent doesn't think that we're playing this, we can just get, like, a free anti-change on something, probably. Card becomes less good if you have to, like, search it out or salvage it, because then your opponent knows that you're going to have it. And since a lot of our characters are level 1s, they can probably side attack without too much issue. But it might still be a card worth playing a copy of, especially against a lot of the decks that want to, like, early play in multiple lanes. Advisor of the Labyrinth's Exploration, Aina. This is a 2/155. It's 2k assist to level 3 or higher, which we're not playing a lot of in this list, so if you play this card, you might also want to add some more early plays. Rest of this card, if there's an event card in your waiting room, choose one of your opponent's characters, and it gains during this card's battle you cannot play event or backup. So this turns off events and backups in one lane for us. This is a way that we can try to beat stuff like anti-damage and rest counter and whatnot. It only beats one lane, so it's not as great as some of our other solutions, but it's on color, it's easy to fit in, and if you're playing other early plays, it might be worth it for the assist effect. One of those other early plays you might be playing is Sword Princess Ice. So this is a 3/2/9k. It is yellow, but because of its experience effect, that might not be a huge issue. It's -1 level if you have 2 or less Climax in waiting room, which should be easy for a deck with this much deck speed. Experience, if another copy of itself is in your level, this gets 1500 power and cannot be chosen by your opponent's effects, which makes this pretty big, 10-5, and can't be chosen is just great for an early play. It can't be anti-changed. It's also going to be able to get around, like, rest counter, anti-damage, stuff like that at level 3. And since the experience is a copy of itself, that means that you're guaranteed to have yellow, right, if you're going for that experience. So you can just play 4 copies of this card, and you don't need other yellow. And auto, on play, this gains 4500 power and following ability until end of opponent's next turn. During this card's battle, all players can't play backup from hands, so pretty typical effect there, where you're just getting really big to clear board. Recurring theme in this deck, I know. Overall, pretty good card, but the number of deck slots you need for it might make it kind of hard to fit in, so I'm not the biggest fan of this, especially since we have so much power anyway that this probably isn't necessary. Supporter Lily. So this is actually one of my favorite cards that I'm testing in the deck right now. On play, you can choose one of your opponent's characters, return it to their hand, and this card's soul does not decrease by side attacking until end of turn. Which means that this card, on its own, actually dodges 2 lanes of, like, rest counter, because you can bounce one to direct attack and then side attack, and you have successfully completely escaped rest counter, which is great. I think that's maybe a reason on its own to play this card, just to beat out Mushoku and Hololive's rest counters. And then auto, on attack, you can pay 2 and discard the level 0 Lily to choose itself and another character, and they both gain, when this card's damage is cancelled, deal 1 damage. So it's more off Climax finisher effect, if we go for like double Hestia plus this Lily, it means that we're not really losing out on cancel burns. We're getting 2 burn 1s and 2 burn 2s instead of 3 burn 2s. So really it's about the same in terms of damage output. And the level 0 Lily itself, if you wanted to play it, it is a coin flip. So beginning of opponent's draw phase, you mill the top card of your deck. If that card's level 1 or higher, she can return to your hand. So she's a plussing 0. And then on play, your opponent declares 0, 1, 2, or 3. Mill the top card of your deck. If it's the level they declared, you draw that many +1. So that effect isn't super great in this deck, because if your opponent knows you're only playing 1 level 2, they just say 2 every time and you're never going to draw cards. But the coin flip effect means that it is still a plussing 0, and it's yellow so it can color fix for this, and it's a discard target to get an off-climax finisher. It's something that I'm really liking. I'm testing right now 3 copies of the level 0 and 1 copy of the level 3, and it's been pretty good. We have a Lowly Goddess Hestia. This is another early play option. If the Brainstorm is in your clock, this gets -1 level while in your hand. So you might want to go up to 4 copies of the Brainstorm if you're playing this. Plus 500 for each of your other characters, making it an 11k, which is pretty big. If you're playing the Aina assist, this is a 13, which is pretty great for sitting on at level 2. And on play, it heals the bottom card of your clock to your waiting room, so that if you clock the Hestia for turn to get early play condition, you won't heal it off. You can play multiple Hestias. So this is one that you'd want to probably play like 3 copies of and the assist if you're playing it. And those be your sort of slots beside your finisher. It's pretty big. I kind of like the idea that you can just like have deck speed and go through your deck a lot, and then also have heals alongside that, alongside your cancels. It's pretty strong. But it does take some deck slots to really be worth playing, because I don't think it's really worth just fielding one of these compared to the other early play. Krozo's Magic Sword is one of the events we would look at. It's a 3/3. If you do not have a character, you can't play it. Deal 3 damage, put this in your memory. Pretty simple card. There is a level 3 in the set that goes with this that's on play, deal 1, or on play reveal top, if it's this event or a character, deal 1. Problem is we're playing a lot of other events, so that could miss a lot. And then it has an effect on reverse. When it reverses battle opponent, pay 1, discard a traded character to play the event from hand without paying cost. So you can kind of get the burn 3 for cheaper. I don't think that card is worth putting in this deck just because of the number of other events we're playing. But if you wanted to play one copy of this 3/3 event and have a way to find it, that might be worth it just for additional finishing power alongside your Hestia level 3. Because the Hestia is not very stock intensive on its own. So this would give you a way to spend that stock to help kill your opponent. And the last card I want to look at is Magic Stone. I'm not actually a fan of this card, but I've seen it as a one-of in a number of lists, so I figured it's at least worth mentioning. If you have 3 or more characters, your opponent returns all cards from their stock to their deck, shuffles, and then puts the same number of cards from the top of their deck into their stock. It's a stock swap, but it's a bad stock swap. The ones that shuffle back into deck obviously have the chance. They lessen your chance of hitting climaxes into stock before you like go for the stock. Since they're shuffling, your opponent has 8 clean stock, you're putting those 8 clean cards back in their deck and then pulling cards out. So you're more likely to just hit those 8 clean cards again than you would be with a regular stock swap. And you're not filling their waiting room with extra clean cards if you're wanting to use like the 2/1 Hestia to shuffle them back. So there are a couple of issues with this card that I think it's probably not super worth it. Obviously, it's probably never going to compress your opponent because, if they have all clean stock, you're going to at least hit. Even if you hit no climaxes, you're not worse off than you were. And if you hit 1 or more, then you're slightly better off. But I don't think the impact is worth playing this card, but it's worth considering if you like this kind of effect. So in conclusion, this deck is definitely not solved. I think this deck has a billion options that you can play depending on how you want to style it. But the deck itself has a pretty straightforward strategy of just keep milling through your deck to keep a good deck state, cancel a lot, be really big, reverse your opponent's board, and then finish them with Hestia. So I've been having a lot of fun with this deck. It feels really toolboxy, really cool, really consistent. And really strong. So I'm expecting to see this deck a lot at the BRO next month, and I expect it to do pretty well. So let me know if there are any changes you would make to this deck, other cards that I somehow missed in my list of like 13 other additional options. or if there are other Danmachi decks that you want me to cover in videos. Thank you for watching. You can find me on Twitter at BoatsDon'tSink, and you can find our store at Facebook, Iron City Games, and ironcitygames.tcgplayerpro.com, where you can buy the singles to build this deck for yourself. So as I said, thank you for watching, and I will see you guys next time.